now we turn to Business Nation. Once again, David Faber.
Tonight, we kick off a new series of reports called Made in America. A look at products so uniquely American, they've become part of our history and culture. We begin with the story of the Slinky, a toy with exactly one part, so simple, so appealing, that even in our high-tech world, it remains as popular as ever. Here's John Frankel with a toy story, an irresistible steel spring, and the strange odyssey of the family that created it.
First, there's that familiar sound.
Who walks the stair without a care and makes the happiest sound. Bounce up and down just like a clown.
Then there's that jingle.
It's Slinky, the favorite of girls and boys. Everyone wants a Slinky, you ought to get a Slinky.
We dare you to get that out of your head for the rest of the day. There are sounds most Americans recognize from childhood, and they all spring from a simple coil of wire made in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania, home of the Slinky. Here at Poof Slinky Inc., much the same procedure goes into the making of the toy that has gone into it since the first time it came off the line. They haven't found a more efficient way to do it in more than 60 years. Tom James is the son of Slinky's inventor. These days, he's a consultant for the company, and he gave us a tour.
Our wire comes in 2,000-pound spools of galvanized spring steel wire. It's all American-made in Shelbyville, Kentucky.
The steel arrives once a week from Shelbyville, where the folks who make it also make wire for paper clips and staples.
The next step in the process is taking this round wire, which comes off of here at 12 miles an hour, into the rolling mills, which my dad created about 60 years ago. It takes the round wire, rolls it flat, and sends it on its way to the coilers.
There are a few things in the Slinky factory that we can't show you, like the actual flattening machine. Although the process is more than 60 years old, Poof Slinky worries that foreign competitors could copy it and make knockoff Slinkies. Another off-limits picture is the heart of the Slinky-making machinery, the coiling unit.
After the wire's flattened, it comes into the coiling unit, which they were all designed by my father. And then about every 15 seconds, a Slinky comes off each machine.
Even though you can't see the coiler, you get the idea. It's basically 62 feet of wire wrapped around a spindle 80 times, give or take. Once spring steel is wound, it doesn't unwind.
When the Slinky comes off of the machine, Bill removes it from the machine and puts a crimp or a band around both ends of the Slinky, which we put on for child safety.
The crimp was added in 1973, hence many of us may not have childhood memories of it, and instead may remember a few Slinky wire jabs from our youth. Once crimped, the Slinkies proceed, single file, to be boxed.
After the Slinkies are made, they come down the belt here, and each one takes its first step right there. And then they're pushed into the boxes automatically and sealed automatically.
Since the first dollar was handed over for a Slinky in 1945, about 300 million of them have been sold. Beyond simply enjoying them for their slinkiness, their owners have apparently made many other uses of them, from serving as birdhouse protectors to acting as antennas during the Vietnam War. No matter what their use, the Slinkies have gone far.
Here are several pallets of Slinkies that were produced today, and there are about 3,000 Slinkies per pallet. These go all over the world, every continent except Antarctica.
Hollidaysburg, the starting point of those Slinky journeys around the world, is a small town 90 miles east of Pittsburgh. It was a vital gateway to the West in the 1800s, when barges from the Pennsylvania Canal were broken into sections here, hauled up over the Allegheny Ridge, and sent on to the Ohio Valley. It wasn't a foregone conclusion that Slinky would make its home in Hollidaysburg. Much of that is owed to one tough woman who worked hard to make it her home.
Wait a minute.
In 1943, Betty James was married to a naval engineer named Richard James, who was working on a device to stabilize shipboard instruments.
A spring took a step in the lab he was working in, and he looked at it and he picked it up and tried it again, and it did it again, and he took it home to Mom. And he said, you know, there's something here.
Richard James worked for 2 years to perfect the toy. And then, one winter night, he and Betty set up a table at the Gimbel's department store in Philadelphia to try to entice buyers. Betty asked a friend to come along.
I gave her $1, and I said, let's go down and we'll each buy one. and make him feel better. Well, we got off the elevator, and over in one corner, there were just hundreds of people waving dollar bills, and my husband was in the middle of it.
That night, they sold 400 Slinkies in just 90 minutes, and from there they took off. As they got more attention and bigger sales, they rapidly grew out of their first factory. The Jameses grew rich, and the family grew too. Their oldest, our factory guide Tom, seen here in an ad from the late 40s, had been joined by 5 others by 1960. It was then that Richard, who had grown increasingly religious and was giving away company assets to charity, presented the family with a bombshell.
And he called all of us downstairs to the kitchen, and we were living in a 31-room home. It was a magnificent home. And Pop said, "I'm going to Bolivia. Who's going with me?"
And he said to me, "What are you going to do? Run the factory or sell it?" I didn't know what I was saying, but I said, "I'll run it."
Betty started to commute each week to the factory outside Philadelphia. Her kids were over 200 miles away, near her family.
She'd leave Sunday nights crying, and she'd come back Thursday evenings. And we had for the kids, a nursemaid. But it was so hard seeing Mom leave every week in tears.
A couple of years after finally finding a spot for the factory near the kids, Betty had a meeting with a pharmacist in Hollidaysburg, right nearby.
And he said to me, "How many acres do you need?" I had absolutely no conception of how big an acre was. And I thought, well, I have 6 children. I need 6 acres. And he said, "Well, do you think $1 would be too much?"
And with the generosity of the community, for $1, what was then James Industries came to Hollidaysburg. Betty, 5'1" and feisty, slowly added a few other products to the line.
A Slinky?
And then this little fellow entered their lives. John Lasseter, director of Disney's Toy Story, came to Betty with the idea of having the Slinky dog in the film.
He said, would I be interested? You bet we were interested. So they chose to use the Slinky dog, and we had dogs all over the factory for a while. The orders were coming in so fast, and it did affect the Slinkies too.
1995, the year that Toy Story came out, was also the 50th anniversary of the Slinky. That year, James Industries sold 3 million Slinky dogs. And 4 years later, the pride of Hollidaysburg was honored with a stamp. So, after all these years, how is this ultra-low-tech toy, really just a distant cousin to the bed spring, continue to entice small hands? Betty James has an idea.
It's one of those things that once you get it in your hand, it's hard to put down. I've often said that it reminded me of eating peanuts. Once you get it started, you don't want to put it down.
When Betty James finally sold her company in the late 90s, she repaid the favor Hollidaysburg had done for her and Slinky. She insisted that the new owner not move the factory and its jobs from the town that had welcomed the James family years earlier. We'll be right back.
Coming up, an Iowa